afternoon session will start with a presentation by Mr. Ramiro Albrieu. And after that, we will have 2 panel discussions. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Ramiro Albrieu, Senior Researcher at CIPPEC, to deliver a presentation on Framing the Scene, Keys for the Future of Work in the Global South. Mr. Ramiro is a Principal Investigator at CIPPEC's Economic Development Program, leading the Future of Work in the Global South initiative, and a macroeconomics professor at the University of Buenos Aires. He is also an associate researcher at the Center for the Study of State and Society and at the Commitment of Equity Institute at Tulane University, as well as a member of the T20 Technological Change and the Future of Work Task Force. Mr. Ramiro, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. It's really hard to start after dinner, but anyway. I mean, I will try to keep it dynamic. We are going to discuss pretty much the same topics that we have discussed in the morning, but with 2 main differences, we can say. One is that we will try to think globally about these topics, and the second is that we will focus on labor markets more than different aspects of technological change. But I mean, beyond that, I think that you will find many of my comments and the comments that we will hear in the session to follow, many links to the discussion in the morning. So the future of work, it's a hot topic now, as we all know, because I mean, everyone is talking about that. Governments, business organizations, we researchers at the universities and so on. So why is that? Of course, because we all know now that we are in this window of change, rapid change in the way we do things, the way we machines and people interact and so on. So in a way, imagine just, I don't know, in 15 years back, the way you work, the gadget you used to use. I mean, it's just a completely different world, right, that we are living now. And this is impacting the way we work, the way we trade, the way we produce, and everything else. So we know that there is a new, deep disruption in the way we do things. We call that always industrial revolution. Maybe it's not industrial, and some people may say that it's not a revolution, but it's, I mean, we know that that firms are changing the way they produce, and new markets, particularly in the digital sphere, are emerging, and so on. Of course, when all of us interested in development economics, when we detect this type of window, we start thinking about opportunities for accelerating growth, for increasing productivity. There are many ways to do that, but one very, very important is just to try to take advantage of this global flow of new ideas, new ways of doing things, such as the one that we are experiencing right now. And of course, it means to creating more and better jobs. If you think about structural transformation, at the end of the day, it's about moving people from bad jobs to good jobs, low productivity, high productivity, informal to formal. I mean, these type of transitions. So we can think of development as of creating better jobs. In our project, we are trying to look at these structural transformations through the lens of the labor market, particularly. But of course, it's also very challenging for the private sector and for the public sector. Private sector because we need to revise, we need to change the behaviors. For example, in firms, in workers, and so on, but also for public policy, because we need to rethink institutions. Imagine the education system that I don't know, about 20 years ago was okay with giving you an old book, and there you will find all the things that you need to know. Imagine now. I mean, these type of institutions need to adapt to new technologies, to new shocks that are coming. And I believe that that's the hardest part of the whole process. Many of our countries that failed in the past to take advantage of these waves of new technologies, in a way they fail to adapt institutions. For example, again, for developing new skills, but also for example, reimagining social protection schemes, right? So of course, this adaptation of institutions is highly complex, because this is not only about technology. I mean, we can have a whole discussion on digital transformation, but then we can have a different discussion on demographic trends, and another about climate change. There are many mega trends that are all interacting, creating a new future, or new futures, we can say. But also because technology, and I think that many of these discussions, I mean, that we had in the morning has to do with that. Technology is not an artifact, a gadget, It's more a new way of doing things. So it means different skills, different settings, different behaviors, different infrastructure, and so on. So this change is more about new ways of solving problems and creating value. So it's more about systemic change that has to do with, of course, new machines, we can say, but also different skills, different organization schemes, and so on. So again, the future of work is important now because, as I just mentioned, we are seeing this window of opportunity, because we know that we need to change our institutions, but we also know that it's really something really complex to do. And it means at the end of the day that the outcome is not predetermined. It's not that you say, okay, now I'm going to grow and change my labor markets and so on. So you can have different outcomes. One, for example, is no structural transformation. What if technology never arrives to your country? I mean, it's happened in the past, and we can see also, we also have this discussion about different regions and provinces within a country. Of course, you can have structural transformation that, even at least in the short term, creates more inequality. This idea that some, the early adopters, take advantage, and then you have other people without the needed skills, without the needed technology, without the needed loudest or louder voice, that can lag behind. So, in the past, when you look at these windows of technological change, you can see some dynamics of widening pre-existing gaps, right? And you can see that now, or we hear about that, for example, regarding gender today in the morning. So you have these cases where structural transformation is feeding inequalities, not, we can say, democratizing well-being, but just the opposite, at least in the short term. But also we can have, of course, a different outcome where we have new technology, new skills, but also the process is inclusive by design. Of course, we all want the third one, but it's something that is really hard to design by public policy, right? So why the focus on the global south? Because future of work, you can say, okay, now we can work in the digital, so there's no boundaries, there are no geographies that matter. Well, why we need to focus on the global south? First, because the working age population is moving to the south. I mean, if you look at the asymmetries in the demographic transition, you will see that, look at here, well, this is too small, but you can see there, let me see if I can, I don't know, I will just try, no, I failed. Well, if you can see there, for example, the last bar is 2,100, and you can see, well, let me go. And you can see here that, for example, in the 50s, you have like 35% of working age population in lower middle income and low income countries. Then you see this transition. And for example, in 2050, like the third bar, you have like 60% of workers in lower middle income and low income countries. And by the end of this century, you will have like 65%. So what we are saying is that the challenges regarding the labor market is moving to global South countries, you know. So, and there, that's why, you know, we are having a lot of discussions on the sustainability on pension systems, on Asian societies, and that's totally fine for Brazil, for Argentina, for China as well, of course, for Europe and Japan. But if you look at the global economy, we are still going through what we call the demographic window of opportunity, and we will be there for the next 2 decades at least, right? So we still need to create a lot of jobs in the near future. Even when we are discussing about age societies, right? So there you have the, well, it's too small, but there you can see, for example, the working age population will increase by 25% worldwide. And this has to do particularly with Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East, and part of Asia. Of course, in the global north, high-income countries, you will see a reduction in the working age population, right? Of course, in some countries, this pressing challenge of creating new jobs is more important. For example, the first bar is India. I mean, in the next 3 decades, we will be, globally, we will have like 1 billion extra people in the working age population. 20% of those will be located in India. So that's a lot. It's 18%. Then you have Nigeria, Pakistan, Congo, Ethiopia, Tanzania, well, and then Indonesia as well, the top 15. So in these countries, we will see an increasing working age population, people trying to find new jobs. While in high-income countries and higher middle-income countries, we will see a reduction in working age population. So it means that the challenges regarding labor markets are particularly moving to this subset of emerging countries, right? So again, I mean, many times when we are discussing the future of work, we have this idea that in the future machines will replace people and all these anxieties around that. But we know that we need to create a future with more and better jobs, because we will have this pressing issue of creating jobs. Just let me come back to this one to say something else, that when you look at these countries that will be leading the dynamics of the expansion in working age population, you have some countries that have been growing a lot. So in these countries, maybe in the future, the problem will not be the quantity of jobs, but more about the type of jobs. You know, in a way that they need to shape the structural transformation to create better jobs. While in other countries that are growing maybe 2%, and you say, well, no, we have a problem of quantity of jobs. You will have to create more jobs. That's the case, for example, in Nigeria or in Pakistan, and for example, India can be an example of the first case, you know, that maybe you will not have problems with creating jobs. The problem is the type of jobs that you will be creating, right? So, again, I mean, this data is important just for fix the idea that when we talk about the future of work, it's about the labor markets in some subset of global South countries. That's the future of work. Then we can discuss aging, we can discuss extension in life expectancy, many discussions that are related, but the global labor market will be located in these particular countries, right? And then, after 2050 in Sub-Saharan Africa, basically. Right? So that's the future of work that we need to highlight. So again, and this is important not only for global South countries, or for these countries, but also it's important for the global economy as well. Imagine that in a way we will have aged societies that will be growing at 1% or less, but this society will need some other countries to grow really fast, with a lot of new jobs being created. So it's also important for the economies that will be aging really fast. Yeah. Well, so in our projects, we start about 5 years ago, maybe, working on trying to think or to reset or reframe the discussion on the future of work, bringing global South perspectives. And in order to do that, our first plan was mainly to systematize all the data, knowledge, papers that were around the world talking about the future of work through the global South lens, and then, of course, to find places where we detect blind spots in terms of knowledge. So with that, in a way, we came up with new issues for taking into account when you are going to have a truly global view on the future of work. For example, regarding technology, we talk about a lot about technological innovation when we think about global North. Of course, they are creating the technology. Technologies are being created for a specific purpose that maybe is not the same if we just move to the global South. So if we want to study technology taking into account the global South, you need to add some issues regarding, for example, adaptation, leapfrogging, technologies in use. You cannot think about artificial intelligence and 5G if you are not taking into account basic infrastructure, as we just discussed in the morning. Regarding skills, for example, we need to, of course, we need to do better thinking about new curricula and lifelong learning, but also about the huge gaps in or between learning and schooling in our countries. That's not an issue maybe in high-income countries. And again, about labor market institutions, for example, discussion about the platform economy that we had in the morning, that there's a view particularly from markets, from countries where formal markets are predominant, that platforms are worsening working conditions, but in some other countries, maybe where informality is really high, maybe you can create some kind of electronic formality out of this by participating in these platforms. So, well, there we have many issues that are common in the literature. That's the second column, and then issues that we have been adding, to the discussion on the future of work in many, through new research, through working with different institutions in different regions of the world. Of course, also with that, we in a way detected some research gaps. Just as we discussed in the morning, if we cannot measure it, we don't have data about something, it's kind of, we can be having a conversation about, something that is totally different from reality. And we have, for example, we have no data comparable data on, the task content of jobs or occupations, on the use of new technologies, on the penetration of the platform economy, on the informal arrangements for social protection in informal settings, so many issues that are critical for assessing the future of work in the global South. So there I just list some of them, but of course I think that I can continue. So finally, I mean, we talk about why the future of work. I try to give you an idea of why we need to look at the global south. And now we will finish with why we need to try to raise the voice of the global south. And here I'm referring to the international arena, because in each country, of course, each one of, I mean, we have our own national priorities. What I'm saying is that when you look at the global discussions on the future of work, that in a way are shaping the way governments are seeing these challenges, and you can see that the discussions are pretty much dominated by global north challenges and opportunity or their own agenda. In a way, we are just trying to copy some agenda without having the right facts about if it suits our own problems. Of course, I mean, you can try to influence the global or international discussions on that in many fora, but the G20 is one of the most important fora to do that. Of course, because, well, multilateral institutions are not working properly for assessing these issues. Imagine maybe in the 60s, it was okay to think about some combination of multilaterals to deal with these topics. Now it's kind of a no-go, right? So G20 instead is more focused on, global issues on future prosperity. There, for example, you have the definition from G20 Indonesia on what is the G20, and you can see their whole strategic role in securing future global economic growth and prosperity. So in a world where no one is looking at an horizon that is no longer than 1 or 2 years, well, this is one fora where we can have long-term discussions, and that's not something easy to find out there, So more specifically, within the G20 ecosystem, G20 is for governments, of course, and there are a lot of engagement groups that are working with the G20. One of them is the T20, that is a network of think tanks and research centers. The idea of these centers is to, first is formed by a lot of think tanks, independent from national governments, academia, and all that, trying to discuss together the topics that are priorities for the G20. But the main idea is to generate, insightful policy proposals, to provide analytical depth to the discussions within the G20, and so on. So that's why we are working within the T20 community, and this is also important that for the first time we will have 4 consecutive years of the G20 in the Global South. Of course, we will have Indonesia now, then India, and then we are going to move to Brazil and South Africa. Brazil and South Africa, they are part of the Global South, but of course they are more advanced in the demographic transition. They have higher per capita incomes and so on. But I think that it's really hard for this community to engage in a process of learnings from previous years, because each year is something new. So now that we can share a common ground for being part of the developing world, maybe we can think of some issues to work year through year. So that's the plan. So the conference that we are having now, we're having now, and we will continue tomorrow, has 2 main goals. The first is to bring new ideas, contributions, and thoughts about the many topics around the future of work. We are always trying to find new voices, new ideas, new pieces of data and knowledge to enrich this view. And the second, of course, is to think together if the G20, T20 is the right place to discuss these issues. And more generally, if the G20 is working for addressing global challenges, working properly, if the T20 is the right place for thinking about that, or we need to pick another ecosystem, for doing that. So here we have activities for, just for today, we will have the first two activities. One is about discussing regional perspectives on the future of work, and the second is about listening to some lessons from the history of the G20. It's a short history, of course, but thinking about previous, presidencies of G20, previous to Indonesia, and so on. Then tomorrow, with a smaller group, I think we will work more on different discussions on the G20, G20, and finally some idea of thinking together about future of work and T20. That's the whole plan. So now, of course, I talk a lot about the global South and global North, but as you may think, and I agree with that, there's no such a thing as a global South, as a homogeneity, as an entity, homogeneous country. I mean, it's more about a diversity of experiences, GDP trends, productivity trends, technological diffusion trends, and so on. So what we want to do now is to start finding some differences across different regions of the world regarding the future of work. Okay, the discussions are not the same in Latin America, where I came from, than in Asia or the Middle East or in Africa. And of course, even within these regions, we will have a lot of disparities, and within each country, we'll have also a lot of disparities. But just as trying to get more, go a little granular on these discussions, we will start discussing or having a conversation about Asia, Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa on that. So, Prerna. So I will invite Prerna. Prerna. Sorry. Yes. From Shashos Network, who is a well-known think tank that is working from India on thinking about future of work related issues, particularly platform economy, gig economy, women, and so on. So then we'll have two other presentations that will be, I hope, by Zoom. But now we can start with you. So, I talk a lot about Global South, and maybe it was just a little unfair about what you are working on, looking at India particularly, or as Asia in general. So first, if you want just to give me an overview of your view on the future of work, that will be a good starting point.
Thank you. And before I start, I'd like to thank CIPPEC and SMERU and GIZ for organizing this meeting and inviting the Just Jobs Network to be a part of it. This comes at a very good time for us because the Just Jobs Network is an official knowledge partner for the Ministry of Labour and Employment for the Employment Working Group during India's G20 presidency. So a lot of the learnings that we're going to take from here are directly going to be relevant to the work that we're going to be doing over the next 1 year. So, yes, so my views on the future of work. My plan was to talk about two key factors that I think are impacting the future of work, and more importantly, the institutional architecture or the changes in the institutional architecture that are necessary for people to be able to, undertake those transitions. And like you said, for it to lead to better labor market outcomes. And the two things that I would like to highlight are one, climate change, and two, technological change, especially the platform economy, because that is a lot of what I work on. And I wanted to highlight these two because the popular narrative of both of these transitions is that it will lead to more jobs, right? In climate change, the transition to renewable energy, the discourse is around the fact that there will be a lot of more jobs that will be created, and arguably that the net jobs created will outweigh the jobs lost. There are even estimates that say that 25 to 78 million new jobs could be created, which in itself is so vast that it completely befuddles me how we can, come to that estimate.
Yes, I mean, you can say, I like it, but how to do that? How is the mechanics of that?
Absolutely, how to do that? How's the mechanics of that? And to what extent does it take into account the socioeconomic and spatial inequalities, which will actually play a very important role in the transition for workers? So that is one thing. And the second, with respect to technological change, I think we forget very often that technological change and its impact on work is not a new thing. The domestication of plants changed the way we worked 12,000 years ago. But it's just that the pace of change has become so much faster that as a result of that, the disparities are also arguably growing between the global north and the global south. And a lot of, when we talk about, the platform economy is going to generate a lot of jobs and provide employment to workers and possibly, move workers from informal settings to formal settings. That again, it's not actually how things play out. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily take into account what are the quality of jobs that are actually being generated. So sure, you might generate jobs, but is that actually making the workers' lives better? And we can go into specifics about that.
In a way, there's an idea of being digital, being in the digital field is just all you need to do, just to get a better job. And what you're saying is that it does, well, maybe you can just reproduce, for example, existing disparities or the same problems in terms of working conditions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and regarding climate, when you talk about moving away from this, we can say optimistic or at least, I don't know, decided future, okay, but what are your thinking of different topics that you can add to the discussion?
Sure. So a few things. One, I think we need to look at the regional differences and, in terms of where are the new jobs that we are talking about going to be created? Are those regions different from where the jobs will be lost? And what does that actually do for regional inequalities? In a country like India, where the inter and intrastate differences are so vast, and that again, it's related to reskilling of workers as well, right? Because the workers who are losing jobs, are they in the same places as the workers who are going to be gaining jobs? If they are different, they're located in different areas. Are you facilitating the migration of workers? Are workers even interested in migrating? Are they even interested in upskilling themselves? Do they have the ability to upskill themselves? Do we have that base level of education that allows us to upskill workers to undertake, jobs in renewable energy? And then how are you providing, or what is the safety net you're providing to workers who are going to be losing jobs? And I'm not sure that our social security architecture is actually ready to absorb workers who might be losing out and might, get the short end of the stick in this transition. So I think those are some of, two things. And then one thing which I find very fascinating is the unintended effects of these transitions. For example, in India, 40% of the revenue of the Indian Railways is generated through coal. And a lot of that revenue is that fed into subsidizing passenger fares. And the subsidized passenger fares play a very important role in the mobility of workers. Right. And when you talk about moving away from coal, what unintended effect will it have on the poor? That has nothing to do with coal. And for us to be able to, one, examine those impacts and then address those impacts, again, we need an institutional architecture that has the ability to think through it and then provide, mechanisms to support those who will not benefit from these transitions.
Right. Okay, one final question of this first round. Many times we think about the best policy frameworks, but we lose the discussion on implementation and the capability of governments to, get a grasp on these issues, to make progress. So how are you seeing governments? Do you think that they are, in Asia, they are prepared, they have the knowledge, the capabilities, or you are thinking that maybe also in implementation, maybe we need to do better than now?
I might not be the best person to answer that, but just from my experience of working on these issues and working with government a little, there is definitely an issue of state capability that needs to be addressed. But then again, I think that's where the research community and the think tank community can play a very active role, is in supporting government in that implementation process. Yeah, but there is definitely, and you know, the supporting in that implementation process doesn't itself mean supporting in the implementation of a program, but overall looking at how can we, you know, as a community, support the capacity building overall of our governments at different levels. So not just, you know, I mean, I think a lot of times we might not pay enough attention to local governments, but local governments are actually the ones that are going to be implementing programs. So, you know, an organization that I used to work with, the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, works very, very actively with capacity building of local government. And I think those are initiatives that can help in increasing the capability of the state to implement a lot of these policies and programs.
Okay, very, very interesting points. I mean, again, I think that Asian experience, particularly India experience, is very unique in terms of, or at least in terms of other regions of the world. I'm thinking about Latin America, even Brazil. I mean, the stories are totally different. For example, in your case, the penetration of the platform economy is higher than in our countries.
Right.
So you have all these discussions where we are even now starting to understand, you know. So it's really useful also for us in the other part of the world. So now we are moving to Yasmine Fahim, who is the Director of Research Programs of the Economic Research Forum. It's a leading think tank in the Middle East. I don't know, Yasmine, if you are there. Okay, there we have a picture, but she's not going to talk to us. I don't know if you are there in Zoom. Are you? I'm talking to the screen, but I don't know if she's... Oh, there's a presentation. I don't know, Yasmine, if you are with us or not. I think that she's in the Zoom, right? Okay. So, anyway, I can start telling you about her work as... Huh? Yes, but Elvis is connected? Yes? Well, so maybe we can switch. Okay, wait. They say they need to wait. Oh, there. Hi, Yasmine. Are you hearing me? No, we cannot hear you. We can see you.
Excuse me, perhaps because Yasmine, you turn on the interpreter feature. You shouldn't be the interpreter, just join in the original audio.
No, not yet.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
And there, if you can try to speak, Yasmine, or no? I'm not hearing. Okay, maybe we can start with Elvis if he is connected, no? Yes, now finally. Sorry. Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
small and medium-sized firms. Fifth point is the education systems. It all boils down to this, I guess. This evolution of education systems in the MENA region has serious repercussions for the future of work. We have a legacy from the 60s and the 70s that dominate education systems in the MENA region. And there are 4 layers of technical skills that various segments of the population need to adopt. So we really need a revolution in the education systems. Everyone needs basic ICT skills, such as using computers and other electrical devices. A second level involves data management and security. A third level covers technical and complex problem-solving skills that could complement artificial intelligence systems. A final set of skills includes soft skills that are not directly linked to technology. And unfortunately, education systems in the MENA region are lagging on all these levels. There are other areas of education that also require specific attention, specifically technical education and training, or what we call in our region the TVET, which could be a very important catalyst for reforming the education system and helping to bridge the gap between new entrants and the demand for labor in the labor market. Now, while we have addressed some of these challenges somewhat unevenly across countries in the region, they still are persistent. So what we would recommend based on the research we have conducted is that, of course, number one would be to invest in human capital. And the education reforms must have the full support of the country's leadership. The systems need to integrate technology into all aspects of learning, from pedagogies to applications. And the education reform should systematically address the mismatch between skills learned and skills demanded. And again, TVET can play a significant role here. And the education system must shift their focus from knowledge transfer to skills development. Sorry, it's a little bit thick. Second point is that we need to have an enabling environment for private sector, because we also have a legacy of a stronger role of the state in all MENA countries. So we need to create an enabling environment for private sector-led growth, promoting businesses, especially tech-enabled firms, small and medium enterprises and startups. And another point that is very, very crucial is the transparency and data sharing, and systematically collecting detailed data on labor markets and growth in order to advance a decent work agenda and not going on blindly. We need detailed data on workers' characteristics, skills of occupations, and topics such as hours of work and income that are also important to track the change in labor demand and be able to address that adequately and efficiently. And very important is to actually collect this data and make it available to the public. The fifth point is we need to reform and expand the social protection programs. So we must shift from costly welfare systems, including public sector employment and energy price subsidies, to social to training subsidies and unemployment insurance. And there must also be a balanced approach to taxing labor versus technology. Otherwise, labor costs will be too high. Finally, social protection systems need to expand their coverage in order to include informal economy workers, particularly farmers and the self-employed, who are often outside the reach of the coverage of the social insurance system, making assistance and targeting very difficult. So yeah, I'll stop here. So over back to you, Ramiro.
Okay, thanks. And I know that you are feeling a little sick, so thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
You hear the Middle East and North Africa's challenges regarding the future of work is, again, also very unique as any other region, but you can see there that maybe the forces of change, you know, this risk-taking by the private sector, this type of dynamics are kind of absent. You know, you used to have this social contract with big government supported by natural resources rents, and people trying to get into the government to work there, and this is broken, and now you need to create something new. And in a way, the Arab Spring a decade ago was like, okay, maybe technologies can create, you know, young people looking for new new governments, new ideas, new jobs, and now in a way things didn't work out that well. So maybe it's kind of really complex in the near future. So now we are moving to Elvis Korku Avenyo. Elvis is a researcher from the Center of Competition Regulation and Economic Development in the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And he's also an associate from the African Economic Research Consortium. And he has been working on technological change, in particularly in parts of Africa. So Elvis, the floor is yours. No, we are not hearing you yet. No.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So I'm just going to share my screen, but I want to say thank you very much, Ramiro, and the organizers for having me here. Yeah, I really wanted to be with you in the same room now, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, I've not been able to make it. And often also the case is also that the benefit of being the last speaker in this sort of session is that part of your the issues that probably you would want to raise often get to be raised by earlier speakers. So I have very little to do than sort of to bring in the South African perspective that probably were missing in the previous sessions. And like Yasmine, yes, I do have a couple of slides as well that I would want to speak to. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. So I think a caveat I want to share even before I get into the presentation is the fact that my presentation this morning focuses largely on South Africa, probably because also the fact that I'm working in South Africa, but also it's also quite important we sort of highlight a caveat that South Africa is not sort of a representation of the continent. But it only happens to be sort of the most industrialized country on the continent. So often when we talk about technologies, new technologies, digital technologies, it is often very important to know what is happening in South Africa, because often it tends to be sort of the frontier, particularly for the continent. And I also wanted to sort of mention here that sort of the perspective that I would want to take, particularly for this talk, for the Global South, or specifically for the Sub-Saharan Africa region, to prepare for the future of work, which arguably we do know that the future of work is no more future anymore, it's here. We do see already that some of the manifestations of the advanced digital technologies. We do see some changes in the labor market that's already sort of ongoing. And we do know the skills, some of the skills are often needed these days to perform specific tasks and jobs. And I think some of these issues came up in Ramiro's question, for instance, to sort of Prema in the earlier sort of discussion. But I do think that we need to also try to understand, or for us to be able to understand the nature of work, we need to understand how the technologies that are changing how we work and the technologies that are manifesting in different ways, we need to understand how the specific characteristics of these technologies, right? And I would want in this particular case to sort of focus on in the manufacturing sector specifically, and see how we do see some of the changes that are happening in the labor markets around the manufacturing sector. So yeah, can I have the next slide, please? Yes, so quickly on this, and I think some of these issues have already come out as well in the previous discussions around the role of digital technologies in social transformation, for instance, and how it is changing the nature of work. So what we've been doing largely at my center at CRED is to look at some of these issues around digital revolution and how it's having the potential to sort of reignite specifically South Africa's reindustrialization agenda. We do know that the evidence emerging largely from South Africa now is the fact that it is deindustrializing. The share of manufacturing value added in GDP is falling. The share of employment from the manufacturing sector is falling. So there is a huge policy initiative to sort of reindustrialize South Africa, and the current objectives are the fact that there is potential for digital industrialization to sort of drive that reindustrialization for the sustainable structured development that is required. But what we do see emerging now is the evidence that South African firms, particularly at the firm level, are not ready to fully adopt and adapt these frontier digital technologies for sustainable industrialization. And this is not actually only for South Africa, but we do see it also even in very advanced countries. The World Bank has conducted some surveys that show that the level of adoption of the new technologies, even in Germany and the US, are quite comparable to the cases we do see in Brazil, Argentina, and South Africa. But the risk there is also that we need to recognize that there is heterogeneity in the sort of technologies and that are adopted in these countries, and the kind of skills and tasks that can be generated from some of these technologies, and that is quite important. So we shouldn't sort of take consolation in the fact that the rate of adoption in the global south is comparable to the rate of adoption in advanced countries, because we do know sort of the nature of these technologies are quite different, and the set of jobs that will be created or probably that will be displaced from this specific type of technologies are quite different. So what we've been doing is trying to sort of provide some granular understanding of some of these issues and how sort of countries and firms are preparing themselves in terms of readiness to sort of enter into the new era of manufacturing, for instance. We do recognize a huge heterogeneity, of course, across sectors, but even within sectors, we do see some levels of heterogeneity. And what is emerging keenly is a key role of sort of digital skills, right? And I'll come back to that in a moment. Next slide, please. So a sort of thing we've been trying to do as well is, and this comes from some colleagues that we're working with in Brazil, in Argentina, and at Unido as well, is trying to understand some of these issues as well from a very theoretical framework perspective, right? And I'll be brief here in terms of how we understand some of these issues. So we do know increasingly that there is a very limited understanding of how the global south is reacting to some of the issues around the digital revolution. And we do see emergingly that there are increasingly different dimensions of digitalization specifically that are influenced by specific drivers and enablers. And the key enabler here is the digital skills and sort of the future of work perspective that we're discussing this morning here. And then we do know that some of these drivers and enablers keenly influence how specific firms and countries adopt, or possibly I would say the adoption sort of trajectory of countries. But we do see that sort of a reinforcing role in terms of the specific types of technologies that are adopted also have sort of specific reinforcing roles on the key drivers that lead. So the basic idea is, if you have digital skills, for instance, that influences you to adopt specific types of technologies. The adoption of the technologies also influence how you develop the specific skills that you need to use these technologies, but as well as the fact that the technologies also in several other ways refine and sort of redirect you to the specific technologies that are needed for you to sort of benefit from the technologies. And these issues also have sort of affect your future of adoption and your future of sort of the skills you develop later on as you prepare for the digital revolution. But we do see different dimensions. And then also we do see that there are a lot of structural heterogeneities that are emerging across even firm level. And when you take the GVC point of view, so across various value chains and across industries, and also across countries. So Brazil and South Africa are similar in different ways, but we do see huge heterogeneity in the skills that are needed for the sort of the trajectory South Africa is taking completely different from Brazil, for instance. And we have also some of the evidence emerging from Vietnam, for instance. And all this reinforced into the sort of the outcomes that we want to see, right? We want to see sort of a future of work that is decent. But I think that sort of the structural heterogeneities, the organizational functions, but as well as the various dimensions sort of define the sort of outcomes you see. And I think there's a need for a clear understanding of how all these work, particularly when we're talking about the global south. Next slide, please. So I think some of the work we've been doing largely sort of comes from sort of a survey we conducted, a firm level survey we conducted in 2021 in the middle of COVID, which was in collaboration with the South African Research Chair in Industrial Development and supported by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, that tries to look at some of these issues. We didn't get a lot of sample. We only got around 516 from a huge number of firms we approached, but of course we can interpret these as the other effects of COVID, right? And I would want to probably in the next part of the presentation sort of give you some insights that are emerging from this survey that touches largely on what we are discussing today. Next slide, please. So I think the issue around heterogeneity comes out clearly from some of the empirical works that have been done, particularly in the global south. And here, a quick glance here simply tells you that majority of our firms and majority of countries in sub-Saharan Africa are still reliant on manual and semi-automated technology, industrial revolution. And on the next slide, here, we do see that we see these heterogeneities also emerging across different size categorizations of the firms, but as well as we do see it also emerging across different industries. And there are specific industries that we do know are quite tech intensive, but we do see, for instance, chemicals and petroleum, for instance, we do see that they are still also very reliant on some of these, I would say, backward technologies or technologies that are not sort of propelling us into the future and into the sort of future of work that we need. So I think this raises a lot of policy issues, right? We do know there is a digital revolution, and we do know that the digital revolution is leading to huge heterogeneities, not only between the global south countries, but also sort of there is a chasm being created between developed countries and developing countries. So if developing countries, particularly in the global south, are not sort of pushing to the frontier, we do see that we do see increasing inequality, particularly in terms of the future of work and also the specific sort of technologies that are being adopted in some of these countries. And I think these are very fundamental policy issues that probably get us back to some of the discussion around being the leaders and laggards across some of these countries. Next slide, please. I'm trying to wrap up quickly. So in the next two slides, just simply about the fact that there are a couple of cross-cutting issues that affect some of these dynamics and some of these trends, particularly in terms of future of work, but also the sort of the type of technologies that are being adopted, particularly when we talk about the digital revolution. And we see sort of a confluence of factors emerging as key, right? Of course, we do know that the very generic ones around cost. We do know that the very other generic ones around the role of sort of being involved in global value chains, but as well as some of the institutional factors that are emerging. But I would want to focus quickly on the issue around skills and human capital, but as well as specifically on digital skills. And what we do see emerging strongly is a key role digital skills is going to play in making in sort of countries prepared and ready to adopt advanced digital technologies. And this also feeds back into our framework in terms of the loop, the reconnecting loops, right? And there is sort of a lot of work that has been done around the important role of digital technologies and capabilities in driving some of the reindustrialization issues that are emerging, particularly in South Africa, but as well as in the region. And we do know also there's a lot of literature around the role digital capabilities play broadly and around foundational capabilities in sort of engendering learning and sort of and technological advancement. So I think we do see some of these key issues emerging strongly, but of course there is a huge level of heterogeneity. And on the final slide, and just to say, to conclude briefly, we do see largely that digital industrialization is fundamental for the sort of structural transformation that are required, and the potential also to sort of help particularly South Africa to escape the middle income trap. But we see some of these issues are also reinforcing the inequalities that we already see on the continent, right? And one of the issues that also happening is we see a huge level of concentration in the economy, because we do see an even speed and scale of how technologies are being adopted, but as well as how it's influencing labor sort of market dimensions and the specific type of skills and that are required by the specific type of jobs that are being lost. So I think a key policy implication of what some of the issues is the fact that, and I think it came up in Prema's discussion, is around sort of specific targeted industrial policy issues to sort of redistribute trends, but as well as sort of in the implementation issues, right? And we do think issues around sort of regional, sort of taking a regional view, but a very regional and local view are quite very, very important if you want to benefit from some of these sort of technological revolutions. Yeah, thank you very much, Ramiro.
Thanks, Elvis. I think that you are trying to measure technology in use in firms, and that's something that we need to know more about. You know, the data first of the usages of different technologies, and then the obstacles, you know, that firms are finding. For example, you mentioned the last point about some complementarities between new technologies and new skills, right? So the idea that there you don't have any substitution, more a complementarity that you need to encourage, right? So I think that the three presentations gave us at least a window for understanding your realities in each one of the region. As anyway, Elvis, you mentioned that of course you talk about the most developed country in your region, but anyways, it's kind of it's ahead every other country. So I think that also is important to know about these dynamics. So Prerna, I want to get back to you here on the floor. In a way, I mean, Asia is growing, and you know, many of our regions are not growing. We are kind of stagnated. But in your case, and particularly in India, you will see like now you are like the engine of the, you know, the global growth, something like that. So there's a preconception that, well, maybe you will solve, you know, all you will create jobs, and then you can manage the quality of jobs. But when you look at some of the imbalances or inequalities that are being created in the process, I mean, maybe you see that there's a lot to do also to correct this type of divides. For example, I'm thinking about the gender imbalance. So we want to talk about your views on that regarding India?
Sure, yes. So definitely, in fact, you know, I'll start with the platform economy and then move on to other sectors possibly. But in the platform economy, we're starting at an unequal position with respect to gender, right? Because you have, 26% of women in India who own a smartphone versus 49% men. Only 20% of those women have used internet on their smartphone. So you're starting with such an unequal position that, you know, we're not taking enough steps to fix that, to close that gap. To close that gap also, we need to look at what are the factors that are impacting women's smartphone ownership. And one big part of it is sociocultural norms, is the fact that smartphones and the internet is seen as something that would corrupt a woman. And you do not, so you shield that. Even if there is a smartphone in the house, a lot of times it's managed by the man, the husband, or the father, or the brother, or the son. So one, there is this, there's this structural aspect of it that we really need to look at. And that is, of course, going to take a longer time frame that addresses cultural norms, behavior change. That's the long game. But parallelly, we can start, when you start, only 20% of women use internet. A lot of them are younger. We can start with addressing the skills gap, especially for middle-aged women. And I'll give an example of this. We recently did a study on women's participation in the platform ecosystem. And we were speaking to a young girl who does micro work. And she said that my mother started doing micro work with me. She'd never touched a computer in her life. But she started doing micro work with me, and it was the first time in her life that she was able to earn some income. And that's a very interesting thing for me, because we in the research community will hate on micro work always because of, how it is not good quality work. But there is actually, and there are many organizations doing this where they are working with rural women with minimal literacy and skills to actually give them the requisite skills so that they can use that to generate income. And that becomes an empowering aspect for them that helps them move up and their families move up. So I think we need to look at some of those kind of interventions that can, have a multiplier effect on women's participation in the digital economy, look at it from that perspective. And then there's obviously, another recent study we finished was with micro and small enterprises, looking at the impact of COVID and the knock-on effect on workers. And one thing you realize is that, one, it's really hard to find women-run micro and small enterprises. You will find, own account workers, self-employed women, but actually finding a micro and small enterprise that is women-led is very difficult. And then once you cross that hurdle, looking at how many of those were able to weather an economic shock like the pandemic, which again then ties into, what is the level of awareness, how connected are they to government schemes that are available to them. So I think those are some of the things that we can really look at and address to address this gender gap that is getting exacerbated by a lot of the changes that we're seeing.
Right. I like what you mentioned about thinking about these transitions for women, when maybe from other perspective or from other occupations, maybe that would be a bad job, we can say. But if you think about the transition, maybe for some women, that's the first step, to someone. So yes, I like that. Then Yasmine, I don't know if, are you there? I hope so. Yes. We were discussing about the future of work in the Middle East, and in a way, this idea of, like a big state, that there's no enable environment for doing new things and so on. And one way to bypass all these problems is to go into the gig economy, in a way that's outside regulation, outside the typical structural transformation discussion. So I know that you have been working on the gig economy in Egypt, so I want you to tell us more about that.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. ERF has been working with the GIZ Cairo on a project on the future of work in Egypt. And we did this qualitative data collection. We did a lot of interviews with employers and employees in working in platform-based activities. And if you don't mind, I could share a couple of slides on the results of this type of work. Excellent. Okay, so the gig economy platform in Egypt was categorized into 4 sectors based on the type of service provided: the asset sharing services, the transportation-based services, professional services, and handmade goods, households, and miscellaneous services that include digital platforms for freelancers to sell homemade crafts or to offer on-demand services for household-related tasks. So that's the majority of the surveyed firms could be categorized in under one of these four. The reason we found, based on the qualitative interviews with employers in particular, and also, of course, employees, that why there's a rise in the gig economy in Egypt, and these included the technological advancements that the world has been witnessing and the availability to communicate large amounts of data and information quickly and cheaply, which has provided the foundation for the rise of the gig economy and digital work, which was also emphasized by the government initiatives and led by the Ministry of ICT in Egypt, to try to enhance infrastructure and issues to connectivity across the different governorates in the country, which is still not very ideal, but there is a lot of effort that has taken place, to be completely honest. And also the other thing was the flexible working conditions, which is another reason. As many people choose the flexibility, the freedom, and personal satisfaction that comes with working in the gig economy. In the qualitative study, the majority of both workers and employers said that the gig work gives them more freedom to choose where, when, and how they work, and that this work flexibility can improve their work-life balance. Also, the workers can work for multiple companies at the same time and shift between different platforms. As a result of this flexibility, it allows them to increase their income. The other thing for employers was, from an employer standpoint, was the ease of hiring and the flexibility of recruiting employees, and their ability to attract a wide range of workers, specifically since some companies do not require any formal documents to hire workers. Now, the last point that was very much emphasized is that because there's a gap between demand and supply, the majority of workers in the qualitative study revealed that employers provide extensive training to their employees before hiring them. Additionally, some employers are concerned with providing professional courses to build the employer's skills on a regular basis and updating those skills, particularly training on technological and interpersonal skills. So these are the main reasons behind this boom. Now, we did this report and we tried to collect data and to be able to try to categorize the firms and the employees and whether they fit in the gig economy or not. We used a proxy, and that was the technology-enabled employment proxy. And the report found that the technology-enabled employment has tripled since between 2012 and 2018. And this is also using data of the Egyptian labor market panel survey. We have 2 rounds, and this is a panel, so you actually are able to track the same individuals from 2012 and up till 2018. And this is a survey that ERF conducts every 6 years in several countries in the region. So we use that data to help us track the same individuals and see what has happened between the 2 points in time. And so the tech-enabled employment has tripled with a high percentage among highly educated than those with secondary education workers, and with more pronounced increase among females. Of course, it's still very little, so it's 8%, but it jumped from 1% in 2012. So there is a lot of potential there. I'm sorry, I need to do this. Okay, as also for the tech-enabled employment by occupation and employed individuals, this has also increased significantly between 2012 and 2018. As you can see from this graph, in 2018, the percentage of tech-enabled employment jumped among professionals, clerical support workers, managers, and technicians significantly. The highest increasing rate was among the clerical support workers, where the tech from 3% in 2012 to 17% in 2018. So it's a significant jump. Technicians also observed an increase in using technology, where the percentage of tech-enabled employment quadrupled between the 2 years. However, there are challenges, of course, in this context that it's not all rosy. So we have still a lot of mileage that needs to be done in terms of enhancing technological infrastructure in the country to be able to harness this potential and build on it. There is also the lack of a clear legal framework that governs the operations, including also hiring of employees in this sector. And this is we could still call it a new phenomenon. So it has not been addressed practically at all in the laws, the labor laws or otherwise, investment laws in Egypt. So this needs to be a top priority. There is also a limited availability of skills, especially linguistic and ICT. Also, although on-the-job training helps address this, but to increase the potential, again, back to the human capital formation, the basic skills need to be taught and addressed. Also, the technical and vocational education and training can be pivotal here and play a very important role to help employees meet the demand or the needs and of skills of employers. And finally, the most important point is that the employees are mostly informal workers, and the exposure to risk and absence of social protection is an issue that was very much highlighted by the respondents of the focus group discussions and the in-depth interviews that we have conducted. And these 4 points need to be addressed as a priority. And if so, we believe that it would have the most impact and reaping the benefits of this shift and this new trend in labor markets. Thank you. Back to you, Ramiro.
Thanks, Yasmine. I think that I really like your picture on the gig economy. Again, I think that that's instead of trying to change the existing system, maybe we can think of creating some different system outside, such as this one. But of course, that's came with a lot of problems. For example, the total absence of some regulatory framework and so on. And also, I was thinking about, we are, for many years, we talk a lot about the gig economy and the platform economy, and there we have a diverse, such diverse segments of the labor market. It's not the same professional services where you are talking about exports of high-key services. And then you have, people driving cars for Uber, this type of jobs. So they are, in a way, it's so hard to find some commonality behind such diversity in segments of the labor market. That may be something to think about, study like separately, maybe different segments of the gig economy, each one with its own opportunities and challenges and so on. So maybe it's also interesting that, and you show some data on that, so maybe it's interesting to make a follow-up. So finally, Elvis, I was seeing your data there, and I wonder if you are witnessing like a fragmentation in the making, in terms of what's going on inside firms in regarding technological use or the use of technology, right? Maybe you say that exporters, older firms, maybe I imagine firms with higher size, maybe they all are benefiting from these new technologies, and maybe you have the other part of the ecosystem, right, that is kind of out of this discussion. So do you think that from your data and your view that there's some new sources of fragmentation within the firm ecosystem thanks to these new technologies? No, we are not hearing you. I suppose that you say yes, but I don't know.
I have to swap one second. Do you hear me now? You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. You need to be changing the audio and then the speaking. I've mastered it now. Yeah, thanks, and thanks to Prema and Yasmine for those very insightful inputs earlier on. I'll react quickly to sort of the question you posed to me, and then I'll probably also touch base on the inequality issues that both Prema and Yasmine has touched on. So yes, so the data we do see, and also it also touches back onto the inequality issues. So we do see also some inequality emerging, but the trend of the inequality.
We are losing you, I think. Can you start again?
It's correct. The fact that large. Do you hear me?
Yes. Now, I don't know. You seem like.
Oh, okay. Do you hear me better now?
Yes. Now.
Is it good now?
Yes. You can start talking.
Okay. So we do see some new trends of inequality and fragmentation. To be honest. So we do know often that we do see differences often in all levels of technology adoption across size of firms, right? We do know sort of small firms tend to be more innovative, and they tend to be on the frontier of technologies rather than the large firms, which are quite sort of reluctant to sort of change their production processes for new technologies. But the cases we do see now is the fact that medium size firms are the ones leading sort of the technological adoption sort of trajectory, which is not too surprising. But also we do see that exporting firms, which is also in line with what we already know, exporting firms tend to be more sort of tech privy than non-exporting firms. Of course, it has largely to do with probably their outlook of things, right? And then the sort of production processes that they specifically implement. And then also, I think another dimension that has emerged from the literature is the industry heterogeneities. There are specific firms that we do see that are originally high tech, but are not necessarily digital, not digital based. And we do see sort of very low tech industries like printing, for instance, and paper making being sort of adopting digital technologies. And then you also see some of the ramifications of these things on the specific types of skills and labor that they require, particularly because we do know that you need some of these skills in order to operate some of these advanced digital sort of technologies for printing, for instance, right? And I think those are quite some new insights that are emerging from the data, and also particularly in the South African case. And you see that also sort of influencing industrial policy and policy, right? Because the question then is, where are the new jobs and where are they located, as Prema already mentioned already. So we do see some of these trends and happening and the hotspots happening, but they're not happening around things that we do know, in particular in South Africa, that has driven growth for centuries. They're happening around industries that traditionally have not been growth driven, but they are the ones that are adopting some of these technologies. So if there are opportunities for these technologies, we must be focusing on some of them in order to create the kind of jobs and the kind of skills that are needed to spare some of these industries. And I think that is quite insightful, sort of in the discussion. And then quickly to the earlier comment, I think often the issues around inequality and Prema are sort of cited a case in India. I don't actually think often that it is emphasized enough. We do know generally that new technologies and technological revolutions and future work will be unequal in several ways. There'll be people that can readily take on new jobs and new skills, and there are people that will be retrenched, and they need to probably go to other forms of work. But I think that even at the firm level that we work with mostly, we see some of these inequalities also emerging quite strongly, and we don't see these gaps closing. And I think the essence of future work, the essence of new technologies, the essence of new paradigms must be able to sort of resolve our socioeconomic issues, right? If it is entrenching our socioeconomic issues, then we need policy to sort of realign the outcomes of some of this outcome. And I think that in the India case, that we need strong municipal government level policies to reduce some of these inequalities. And we do see these also emerging from the digital economy, where we do know that the digital economy has sort of democratized the sort of labor markets, but we do know also the inequalities and the vulnerabilities that is posing in another dimension. And I think some of these issues need a more holistic policy perspective in order for us to understand some of these issues. And some of the worst outcomes are emerging in the global south, right? Because we don't have the institutions to sort of try to manage and have policies that resolve some of these negative outcomes. So we tend to sort of have all these negative outcomes whilst we see a few hotspots or a few windows of opportunity emerging. And I think that is important. We realign the opportunities with the weaknesses that we do see emerging in the system for us to have a very good outcome. Thanks, Ramiro.
Okay, thanks, Elvis. Yes, I like your thoughts on that. Okay, so we have just 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know if there's some question from here, from the audience, or no? So we have a question from online, from Zoom. That is that we didn't mention the word poverty in any of our presentations. So we want to try to link what you are discussing, your research topics, on with the dynamics of poverty in your country or your region. For example, in my case, just to start this, I'm thinking that if we don't change the policy frameworks, in Latin America at least, we will have an increasing share of the population being like permanent poor, you know, like not only with this economic cycle, but I'm saying in terms of skills, access to technology, and so on. So I'm kind of pessimistic about the status quo scenario regarding our policy approach or responses to technological change. But maybe you have a more optimistic view.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that is very true. We did not mention the word poverty. I think in a lot of our work, maybe we tend to use talk of vulnerable populations more, and so that's how we look at it. Yeah, I mean, definitely, like you said, I think there's policy intervention required, but so we look at it in the, in terms of work. Where would you find the most vulnerable workers? The most vulnerable workers are the ones who are the most marginalized, the poorest. What are the sort of work relationships that they're interacting with? And how do you strengthen those relationships? So for example, the most vulnerable workers in India arguably are employed in micro enterprises, right? And majority of those micro enterprises employ 20 or less employees. And while there is, there's something to be said about there is an opportunity for micro and small enterprises as we say undergo, green transitions. The reality is that to support those micro enterprises, we need a much more enabling environment in terms of government support, access to credit, actually supporting them with technological upgradation. So I think a lot of our work comes at poverty from that perspective of looking at, what are the interactions of workers with what sort of firms, what sort of employer-employee relationships, similar for the platform economy, and how, what role can policy play in strengthening those employment relationships so that the most marginalized do not end up getting squeezed further as we undergo transitions.
Okay. Yasmine or Elvis, some thoughts on that, on linking poverty to your research? Yasmine, you want to?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So yeah, when we talk about social protections, that's basically the objective. It's to save or help vulnerable groups working in informal economy or precarious jobs, precarious employment in general, and support those vulnerable groups, especially from falling back into poverty, and help with, doing some sort of a transformative social protection approach rather than piecemeal interventions would definitely address the issue of poverty and vulnerability in general.
Elvis?
Absolutely, thanks. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I agree. I agree with the question, and I think that often we tend to imply sort of the poverty reduction and the poverty implications of some of this work, right? And I think that it is important we mainstream sort of poverty partly as an end goal, as we also pursue structural transformation and probably inclusive growth, right? And often we tend to use inclusive growth in ways that sort of imply inequality, imply poverty reduction as well, and then also brings in sort of issues around vulnerability, and then marginalization. So I completely agree, and I do think that there are clear linkages already. Structural transformation using digital technologies already imply that it's hopefully that there'll be new jobs and there'll be new reskilling and retraining. That alone provides wages and incomes in several ways that reduce poverty, right? I think what policy needs to do is then to try not to make this very unequal, so that it makes it a sort of an equal playing field where there are opportunities for everyone and there are opportunities in ways that everybody can engage in the process in several ways at their own levels of capabilities and skills. And I think those sort of all lead to sort of poverty reduction strategies. And I think that social potential issues that Yasmine also raised are quite key. There may be people that will lose their jobs because their jobs have been transformed. So they need a system that sort of protects them in ways that they don't become vulnerable because they've lost their jobs, given that they can be retrained, for instance. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Elvis, thanks, Yasmine. Thanks, Prema, and for this discussion. I think that we, at least I get a lot of food for thought about these discussions, and I think that we are picturing a transformation that has a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of things to change, you know, in terms of policy, but also in terms of the way we as researchers are addressing these issues, right? So again, there's an agenda also for us as researchers to try to recast some of our common views and language and so on. So thank you very much for that. Yes. I think that, yes, we have 5 minutes, so it has to be a 1 minute question.
Thank you. I actually just give some comments. Maybe this might be helpful for the concluding remark. So thank you so much for the discussions. I really enjoyed these topics because when we talk about digital and economy, both concepts are intertwined, but it's very dynamic, especially in the G20 presidency. So if I may share, in the G20 Bali declarations, there are around 10 until 11 points talking or mentioning or acknowledging the digitalizations among 52 points in the declarations. And it's interesting that, especially for example, on the point 26, there is an importance of digitalizations to 7 engagement groups, including Think 20. So the others are like youth, women, Sci20, Supreme Audit, Science, and also business. Labor, business, and parliaments. And there is one highlight that I think it's very useful, that when it comes to the digitalizations into the recovery and empowerment, it's also very crucial to see the just transition, especially when Prema mentioned about like green jobs or climate change and digitalizations, because there is also a target in the G20 in the next 5 years. There might be 30 million green jobs coming up, but it might be also, destroying the conventional or existing jobs, which also give more unstable employment. There is also a survey that we did from the Y20 Indonesia among 5,700 young people around 19 countries of the G20, 62% are very worried about the future of work because they don't have stable social protections. They don't have like a certain foundation to restructure or to think and develop their skills. So I totally agree what like Yasmine mentioned about how the tax should be managed as well to reduce the labor costs, and also what Elvis and Prema mentioned about how the gap between enabling environment from the governments who might be available, but it's not matching with the existing skills or the platforms that the young people or future generations already developed. So yeah, this is, I mean, my conclusion point is it's very important to include every kind of identities in the engagement groups and also working groups, and the spirit of collaboration should be inevitable. It's a must, especially if we see the dynamics of digitalized cybersecurity, including the geopolitical tensions as well. Thank you. Oh, I'm Gracia, by the way, from Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for these comments. I think that this is for having a long conversation, but we are about to finish. But really, it was really insightful, your comments. So we are finishing this session. I think that now we are going to the final session of the day. I don't know if you want to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Ramiro, and all the panelists for the fruitful discussion on the future of work, particularly in the Global South. Next on, we'll have the second panel discussion on T20 as a forum to harness change that will be led by Bapak Asep Suryahadi as the lead co-chair of Task Force 5 T20 2022. Bapak Asep Suryahadi is a former director of SMERU and now SMERU Senior Research Fellow. He is a prominent Indonesian economist focusing on labor, poverty, and inequality. He has published papers in peer-reviewed journals such as World Development, Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies, and Health Economics. Pak Asep, the floor is yours. And I need to remind you that you have 45 minutes for the second panel discussion. I'm sorry, Pak Asep Suryahadi, because one of the speakers has not joined us in Zoom, so probably we have to spend like 5 minutes for the coffee break. Is that possible? Okay. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, some light refreshments are already available outside this room, so you can have them now while waiting for another speaker to join us. Thank you.
Oke, pakai ini tesnya. Hi Dennis, can we test your voice? We cannot hear you, so maybe you can change your channel to the main.
Can you hear me now? Is it now better?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you, Dennis.
Oh, good. Hi, everyone.
We still cannot hear you.
Can you try again, Dennis? We have changed the setting in the plenary room. Can you please speak
Okay.
again? Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? I can see. I can see that my microphone is working, but apparently you cannot hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
You can hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So maybe we can start.
Yes, for me, it's fine. Is Peter already here? I cannot see him.
Peter Morgan is there, according to Dennis. Kata Dennis udah ada di Zoom kelihatan. Ada.
I'm sorry, Pak Asep, Peter Morgan has not shown yet.
Oh. Okay, Dennis, can we start just the two of us?
Yes, sure, let's start.
Yeah, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's start our last sessions today. Thank you for staying put with us until this late afternoon. So in these sessions, we will have a panel discussions on the role of T20 as a forum for harnessing change. Yeah. As introduced by the MC, I'm Asep Suryahadi from the SMERU Research Institute, and I was also in this year G20 Indonesia Presidency. I was the lead co-chairs of the Task Force 5 in the T20 on inequality, human capital, and well-being. As you know, T20 or Think 20 is one of the engagement group within the G20 process. Yeah? And this afternoon we will try to find some lesson learned from the T20 processes, both from the Indonesia presidency as well as the previous presidencies. So with us now, Peter is also already here. Good afternoon, Peter. Can we test your voice first? Could you please speak? We still cannot hear you. Can you change your channel to main?
I'm sorry, Pak Asep. I think it should be in English channel, interpretation, and then choose English.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah,
okay, good.
Hear you now. Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we have two resource persons as panelists to discuss with us today the role of T20 as a forum for harnessing change. The first one is Dennis Gorlich. Dennis is the head of the program team at the Global Solution Initiative. He is also a program manager at the New Institute. He's responsible for the work on the economic transformations. Prior to that, Dennis managed the T20 process during the Germany's G20 presidency. And our second panelist is Peter Morgan. Peter is a senior consultant for research at the Asian Development Bank Institute, and he also serves as the advisor to the Dean of ADBI. So I would like to start the discussion with a question to Dennis. Yeah? So as we all know here that the main role of the T20 is to generate insightful policy proposals that provide an analytical depth to the G20 discussions. And to fulfilling this role, the T20 must find ways to engage with the G20 activities, including forging cooperation with the working groups, for example. But there are also risks associated to that, yeah, because if you work too closely with the government, with the working group, there is a chance that T20 will just become a kind of rubber stamp or working for the interest of the government, and we may not come up with innovative solutions to the problems faced by the G20 countries. So in a way, there is a dilemma here. Yeah? We need to work closely with, but we don't want to be too close so that we are not driven by the working group. So I wonder if Dennis can share your experience on balancing these two dilemma. Yeah. Please, Dennis.
Thank you, Asep. Hi to Indonesia. I'm sitting here in Hamburg in a phone booth to talk to you. I would, of course, be much rather like to be with you in close. I think you're meeting close to Jakarta, if I understood that well. As for your question, I think you're right. There is, to some extent, a trade-off, but I think you've probably hit on the point where I think the T20 is probably the most useful group, and that is this dynamic between the independence of the advice and also the influence with policymakers. Now, the G20 presidency often, as you might know, tasks international organizations like the World Bank or the IMF or the OECD with expert to deliver expert advice on certain questions that are relevant. And here, of course, these international institutions, they have well set up research departments with excellent researchers, as we all know. But of course, they are still governed by member states. And I think here is an important gap that the T20 can fill, because the T20, as you all know, consists of research institutions and think tanks that mostly operate independently in their home countries. And so working together, bringing this group together to find avenues for strategic cooperation in the G20 that is supported by all countries can well be identified by these think tanks if they have the right space to work together. And here I think they have this role that international organizations cannot play in this regard. And so I think you're right. It's absolutely vital that the T20 institutions remain independent of government. But at the same time, of course, we need to secure, I think, a permanent and regular avenue for exchange with the G20 presidency, so that these proposals, these narratives that are developed in the T20 can find their way, to the presidency. I see it rather as a support, finding, areas of strategic cooperation, finding common pathways, finding overlapping interests in all countries that can then be very important and relevant, I think, for the respective presidency. And this is, I think, advice that could not really be, say, received from other players than the T20.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. That's a very interesting point of view. Yeah, and since you mentioned the role of the think tank or research arms of international organizations, yeah, and here we have Peter Morgan. Peter is a senior consultant for research at the ADBI, as I mentioned before. So it will be interesting to also hear the view from Peter, yeah, on this issue. What is your take on this balancing act? Yeah, since ADBI, of course, have to answer to the member countries of ADB. Yeah. Please, Peter.
Yes, thanks very much. Yes, also, by the way, can you hear me?
I cannot hear Peter.
Okay. Yes. Also, I would note that ADBI being part of ADB, ADB, of course, works directly with a number of the working groups too. So to a certain extent, we have to both collaborate with ADB, but also have our own separate efforts going through T20. So, but I would say on the whole that I don't really see that much of a conflict. I mean, my impression of collaborating with people in the working groups is that they are very open to new ideas. I mean, they certainly are well exposed to the more traditional solutions. They get inputs from a lot of international organizations, obviously, the World Bank, OECD, that kind of thing. So that they, I think, appreciate the independent role and independent point of view, and perhaps new thoughts that think tanks can bring to them. So I don't see it as a major conflict.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So if I may take the key point from your intervention is that being open, yeah, on both sides, on the T20 side, on the working group side and government side, is the key to this having a fruitful cooperation. Yeah. So okay, I think that's a good idea. Peter, can you hear? Dennis, can you hear Peter's voice?
No, I could not hear Peter's
I can't hear
voice.
Dennis either, so I'm not sure what the problem is.
And I still cannot hear it. And I changed the interpretation channel from English to Indonesian and back, but it doesn't help.
I see. So I hope the technical team will work on this. Yeah, but since we can hear both of you, so I hope we can continue the discussion.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Okay. So let's move to the next issue. This is also based on my experience. Yeah. The T20, the Think 20, consists of quite diverse research institute and think tanks from all over the world. Each, of course, has their own expertise, have their own views on issues. Yeah, and sometimes it's not too easy to come up to a agreed view on certain issue. Yeah. So in both of your experience, how actually the working process within T20 should be managed, so these diverse views from different members of the T20 can be accommodated and come up with, as I mentioned earlier, insightful and innovative solutions to the problems in the G20 countries. Maybe Dennis would like to start first?
Okay, yeah, I can give that a try. Peter, can you hear me?
Obviously
you cannot
not.
hear me either. Okay. Well, this is funny. Well, I think you're right. This is a very diverse group of institutions, but at the same time, exactly that is the beauty of the T20, that we have this diversity, and that should be, taken care of by all means, I think. So how can these perspectives be brought together? So I think, of course, regular meetings will be important. We have made this, like you have done that too, and with Indonesia's presidency, and also Japan before, and the presidencies before that too, to have an inception meeting where the task forces can gather for a first time and share ideas. I think the task forces have to remain open with respect to receiving different policy briefs from different actors in the task forces, so that we are able to accommodate all the various positions in there. That may mean in the end that there's a whole variety of policy briefs is arriving, which however often represents different views. And then I think it is an important task of lead co-chairs and co-chairs of the task forces, as well as the task of conference organizers, where these task forces are brought together and where they're brought in touch with G20 and other stakeholders, to sort of, summarize the different viewpoints and find not necessarily a consensus, but to see where the overlapping interests are in all these various policy briefs. And this is probably the major piece of information that is most relevant for any G20 negotiations.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dennis. So in that case, we need to have accommodative lead co-chairs and co-chairs of the T20 to gather all the views from the different research institute and think tanks submitting policy briefs to the T20. Peter, would you like to add more to this?
So I think there are basically two stages where you need to have collaboration and a working out of views. The first is in the drafting of the policy briefs themselves. Sometimes we find that more than one team has proposed a very similar kind of policy briefs that basically the same topic. So in that situation, we frequently urge them to combine forces and produce a single policy brief. And that basically forced them to kind of hammer out any disagreements that they might have. So I think that's quite effective. And then the second stage would be in the drafting of the communique. That's something that I was personally involved in when I was the lead co-chair back in 2019. And that required a very extensive iteration process. We went through, probably about 10 drafts before we got agreement, from the various persons who were involved in drafting the communique. So I think that just takes patience and a bit of diplomacy.
Okay, thanks. So the key is patience and diplomacy. Yeah. We also have experience on your first phase you mentioned where we have to combine policy brief. Fortunately, in our case, it works quite well. But I heard in other task forces, not always the case. Yeah, and sometimes they just refuse to cooperate.
Yes.
Policy brief didn't come out. Yeah, in the end. So we need to learn to take cues from others also. Yeah, in our work. I would like to move to another issue, yeah, which I think is quite important for T20 as well as for G20 way into the future, because as we know that the presidency of G20 rotates, yeah, among member countries from one year to another. Indonesia is the president for 2022. Italy was the president for 2021, and India will be for the president for the 2023. So it's a good thing that there is always a new ideas come up within each presidency, but also there is a questions about continuity about research agenda. Yeah. So since both of you have longer experience working on T20 and G20 than myself, maybe you can have more fundamental view on this than myself. Peter, would you like to start first on this?
Okay.
Continue.
Yes, I think it's definitely a trade-off, and it probably starts in two separate areas. One is, what are the priorities of the country that has the G20 presidency in a particular year? Certainly, there is continuity in those objectives, but policy issues. But there's also changes over time. So India has certainly, I think, already indicated some new areas that they want to focus on, and maybe other areas that they perhaps will be de-emphasized from previous G20. So I think the first step is always to try to figure out what what that country
apa yang
that has the G20 presidency is, what
dilakukan oleh
priorities are. And the other main source of difference over time
dan
is just the participants in the task forces. So I think it's good to have continuity, to have some of the same task force members
Excuse me, Peter, can you hear us? We are losing your voice. Can you please try again the button, the interpreter? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So we want both, yeah. We want continuity, but also at the same time we want to address new and emerging issues, yeah. Dennis, you have a view on this? Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, thank you, Dennis. I agree. I think the Global Solution Summit is quite an important forum, yeah, for us all involved in the G20 from all the G20 country members to learn about the issues that are relevant, especially for newcomers like us who never been involved in the G20 process before. For example, during our first encounter with the T20 work, we tried to learn the issues from the previous G20 presidency by looking at the policy briefs and communiques from the G20 Italy, G20 Saudi Arabia, and so on. Yeah, and now we have started to have discussions with the India G20 and T20 partners. In fact, as of today, a delegation from T20 Indonesia is flying to New Delhi to meet with our partners there to discuss the lessons learned from the T20 Indonesia. We still have some time in this discussion panel, and I would like to give opportunity to you here if you would like to comment or have a question or raise any issue to get it, to be discussed with Dennis and Peter, you are most welcome. Yeah. Ramiro, please. Yeah, we need mic for Ramiro.
Yes. Hi, Dennis and Peter. My question is, how is the best way to engage with the other engagement groups? I mean, because they're, in a way, we are all working on the same topics, the same issues with different perspectives. So how do you think about how to engage with the B20, the L20, and the U20 and the other groups? Thanks.
Thanks, Ramiro. That's a very important question. Yeah, we have so many other engagement groups. Yeah, and maybe around 20 or something like that. And I heard that this year there is a new engagement group. Yeah, the M20, the Music to 20. Yeah, I don't know if it will continue or not in the presidency next year. Yeah. Peter, would you like to start? Okay, thank you, Peter. Dennis, please. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Peter and Dennis. Point it's well taken that cooperation is good, but our needs should be maintained. I think that's the key from the two answers. Yeah, in our own experience, it's not always that we learn something from the other engagement group, but also the other engagement groups can learn from us. Yeah. For example, I was once invited by the Y20, the Youth 20. They asked me to give presentations about the macroeconomic of youth. Yeah. I actually never did a research on this, but it forced me to do some quick analysis about the role of youth in the macroeconomy, which is quite interesting actually. Yeah. But there's one engagement in particular, which I think is quite overlapping with T20, and that is S20, yeah, Science 20. Because if we look at what they do, it's quite similar actually with us. I wonder if we should merge these two engagement group or maintain it separately. S20 basically it's the universities, yeah. I don't know, maybe in India later you will find these two engagement group are quite similar actually, S20 and T20. Okay, do we still have time? Yeah, I think about maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, please. So when you turn on the mic, it takes some time before it's actually working. Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Dennis. Nice to see you. This is Pratik from ICRA, New Delhi. Just talking about collaborations, Ramiro pointed out that collaborations across engagement groups is important. But I feel, the more that now that, in India, a lot of background work has started for our G20 presidency, the more we are working on it, the more we realize that there is a huge information gap that exists. A lot of outcomes and final documents does come into the public, but a lot of background work that goes into it. I'm sure Indonesia, as the chair of the task force for Indonesia, you must have kind of realized that there is a lot of background work that goes into the final outcomes that come into the public. So if we can have a kind of platform where you have all the background work that goes into it, so that each presidency can kind of benefit from it, because if we can try and fill that information gap, that eventually will feed into better outcomes, better and efficient kind of policy making as well. So just wanted to hear views from Peter and Dennis, since they're part of the previous presidencies and played an instrumental role during the previous presidencies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I would like to start with Dennis, because I see that Germany has done several efforts in this area, including the GSS and GSI, and also I see there is a website on G20 Insights, for example, which provide quite useful information. Dennis, please.
Yes, thank you. I have in mind at least three important sources of information that are extremely relevant for the incoming presidency. The first one is a resource that has been provided for a number of years by the University of Toronto's G20 research group around John Curtin, who has collected, the important summit and ministerial documentations, all the official communication by the G20 on their website. In addition, they also added some sort of evaluation of how well member countries did with regard to the promises they have made in communiques. So what kind of policy initiatives in the various countries have been initiated and so on in response to the communique. And they published this evaluation report as well on their website. So that's the G20 research group at the University of Toronto. Then quite recently, the German Technical Cooperation Agency called GIZ, also a co-host of this event, has published, I think, in partnership with the Development Working Group of the G20, a website where they collect all relevant documentation of the G20 presidencies, all the official documentation. And the interesting thing about this website is that you can actually search for keywords. So if you would like to find out if the future of work has been mentioned in any of the communiques in the past, this website is an important tool because you can actually follow through where this has been mentioned in the past, and also how this path of policies has developed. And then thirdly, what you have just mentioned, Asep, is a website that we have initiated in 2017 under Germany's G20 presidency. It's called G20insights.org. And on this website, we have collected all policy briefs that have been written by the T20 and the various task forces. And we have allocated them by issue, matching the actual task force of the current presidency. So in that regard, it's an important repository, we think, of the work that the T20 all together jointly has produced over the years, always linked to the current issues of concern.
Thank you, Dennis. That's very useful information. It's was useful for you, the team from India. I wish we had this discussion a year ago. Yeah, it will be better for me. But I know, in addition to India, Japan also will become the host of T7 next year. So the ADBI will become the host of T7, yeah, next year. I wonder, Peter, you have any plan to gather this background information? Because it will be similar, yeah, with India, with what you are facing now. What is your plan on this?
Well, I think the T7 process has been much shorter than the T20 process, so that you know, I think our main collaboration will be with Germany on that. But we certainly you know, look forward to getting as much information out of them as we can to facilitate our process. And of course, we're also very interested. I mean, one of the goals of our T7 is that it should be open to any country, not just the think tanks of the T7 member countries. And so we want this T7 to be a kind of a platform so that the other countries can kind of communicate their views to the G7 countries and hopefully shape their views on the global situation. So we very much hope to be inclusive in the T20 process, in the T7 process.
Okay, thank you, Dennis and Peter, on this issue. Yeah, I think we have used up our 40 minutes time. Yeah, so I have to close this sessions. I believe you agree with me that this has been a very useful session, very informative for us, and hopefully will be very useful for the India team who are here. For that, please give applause to Dennis and Peter. Thank you again, Dennis and Peter. And with this, I close the session and I return the session to the MC. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
very much, Pak Asep and all the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, after having 2 panel discussions in the afternoon session and plus 2 panel discussions in the morning session, I think it's time for us to have Ibu Heni Kurniasih to summarize all of the issues that we have discussed in today's forum. Ibu Heni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Wiwin. Good afternoon, everyone. It has been a long day, and we have discussed 2 different topics, but interconnected ones. One is on the digital transformation, and the second one on the future of work and the roles of the T20 to harnessing changes. And I would like to start by stating what has been discussed by our presenters in the morning, that digital transformation is arriving and all aspects of our lives are actually now mostly digitalized. And in the morning, our speaker from SMERU stating the position paper on just and inclusive digital transformation, and our discussions coming from different background. One from the women's banking, talking about closing the gender gap, and then the Pak Ibu Agnes, and then Pak Mulyawan also talking about the navigating business competition in the new digital eras, so that no one will be left behind or being what is that called, disadvantaged from the digital transformation. And then Pak Sudarman from Bangka Belitung providing very great examples on how the roles of the local government in partnership with private sectors to ensure the digital infrastructures and access can be available at the local level. And finally, Pak Wira, who are not here with us this afternoon, talking about the insurance for the gig workers and also for the marginal groups who cannot having access to the what is that called, to the formal labor markets. So all of these speakers, from what I can take, is underlines that there are new challenges and opportunities emerge from the digital transformation. And Mia Palmira from SMERU highlights the roles of government to ensure that the challenge coming with digital transformation can be addressed, while Ibu Agnes discuss how to close the gender gaps related to financial literacy and digital capacity by enhancing the capabilities and digital financial literacy, including the campaigns on that. And Pak Mulyawan from KPPU, Indonesian Business Competition Agencies, underlying how the enforcement of the digital cases and advocacy by Indonesian Competition Commission can be important for the future digital economy. And Pak Darmawan mentioning one important thing about the rural, on the rural and digital infrastructure, focus on rural areas and women as well, as the important thing through the collaboration in financing and cooperation, not just with the government, but also the private sectors, private providers. ladies and gentlemen, the whole participants, that digital transformation that we discussed in the morning really nicely linked to the discussion on the future of work. And the question from Jacob on what main lessons from digital transformation Indonesia that can be useful for future of work was, I think, a good way to link it into our discussion that will continue to tomorrow, the agenda on future of works in Global South and raising the voice of Global South in the G20 process. So this afternoon, the speakers have bring the voice of Global South on the future of work about a very relevant thing. Ramiro mentioned about the issues of the topics of future of work from Global South are really different from Global North, with some questions that Ramiro underlines to be much more given focus to ensure that Global South perspective are taken into account much more in the T20 and G20 process. And then Prema also from the South Network mentioned about the think tank roles in supporting the government in important policies, for example, not to implementing the program, but to ensure the capacities the capacities in it. I think that is also one thing that comes up during the afternoon session, which are very important. And Yasmine from Egypt highlighted many similar challenges, quite similar to the discussion in the morning, including the existence of labor market inequality, demographic trends in inequalities, between urban and rural, as well as inequalities on wealth, about a rigid education system, and the importance of the human capital, investing in human capital. And one more thing, Elvis from South Africa said that future of work is no longer in the future, but already happening. Meanwhile, Africa, maybe like other countries, and Indonesia, we talk about whether we are prepared or not. Elvis mentioned that South Africa is not prepared fully to adapt the digital technology, especially in the manufacturing industries. I think that was what I wrote and tried to summarize from the discussion earlier. And then finally, Pak Asep conversation talk show with Peter Morgan and Dennis Gorlich underline how the T20 provides independent ways in the process to influence G20, which are different from other engagement groups. The conversation from Pak Asep, we all still freshly know it, so I will not summarize that. But the key point, I think, is we all realize the link between the digital transformation that are happening now with the issue of the future of work in the Global South, including the challenge and opportunities. And there is still ways to go. And one of these is through engagement group like T20, which SMERU is involved through the Task Force 5, so that we can providing like independence, advice, and what is that called? Maybe independent contribution for the G20 process. I think that is from me. Thank you very much for the your patience to attend today's session, long day, and I hope tomorrow discussion will be further further digging how we can ensuring the agenda of future of work, as well as maybe if there is emerging agendas like what Asep said, not just the continuity of what has been proposed, but also maybe new agendas will emerge during the intensive discussion between Indonesian participants and our guests from other countries. Thank you very much, and I will give the time to moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Heni. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching the end of today's forum. And without further ado, we'll have Ibu Anti to once again come to the stage to give her closing remarks. Ibu Anti, the time is yours.
So, thank you, Wiwin. I think we finally come up to the end of this session. It was a really great pleasure for us to have you all in the discussion. It's very fruitful and very interesting discussions. And since Henny has been summarizing nicely what we have discussed in the morning and also in the afternoon, I just would like to use this opportunity to thank you all for your participation in the discussions, and especially once again I would like to thank CIPPEC and also GIZ for the support and the collaborations, and for all the participants that already participate in the discussion. I hope that the discussions will give us all more insight about what we have discussed today about digital transformation, on how we will make it more inclusive. And I also actually learned a lot, when I heard the experience from other countries in the global south. I think there is a lot of similarity that we experience by Indonesia and also with other countries. I mean, surely that we need to have more communications and sharing of experience so that we will all be able to give our governments and also our community a better advice for better inclusiveness and also readiness to face the challenge of new era of works that we are facing now, and it's already happening. I mean, we are realizing or not, it's already there, and I think we will be able to see a better future for our younger generations. I think with that, I will close the sessions. And once again, thank you for all your participations. And I hope that you can continue communicate with each other, and we'll have more collaborations in the future. Thank you, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Ibu Anti. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay here a little while because there are some stuff that I need to inform. First of all, we will have free time networking activities after this, and welcome dinner at the Barata Resto. It's on the 3rd floor, and the dinner will start at 6 p.m. Next, our speakers' presentation files are available for download on SMERU's website. And then we would really appreciate if you could fill out our participant satisfaction survey by scanning the code on the screen. Can you see that? And last, while you're leaving this room, please return the interpreting devices to the committee. And okay, one last thing, I need to ask you a question. Is it okay if I end today's forum with a short poem? I mean, it is Indonesian poem, and not Indonesian poem, English poem, but it's short one. Is it okay? Yeah, okay. It's like to have it fun, okay. As the rain stops in the afternoon, the flock of birds will start flying around. Our meeting might end up soon, but sure, we have some memories to carry around. Thank you and see you next time.